record. Okay, so hello and welcome everyone to episode 8. I'm Lindsay Randall, the host of the speaker series. Digging In is a series of live presentations with scholars from around the country, co-sponsored by the Robert S. Peabody Institute of Archaeology and the Massachusetts Archaeological Society. We're going to begin with a land acknowledgement for the land that the Peabody Institute and its school Phillips Academy are on. Phillips Academy occupies the land of the Pennacook and Patuxet people and the lands of the contemporary Abenaki, Massachusetts, Wampanoag, Wabanaki, Pokanoket, and Nipmuc nations. We honor all Indigenous people who are here now, have been here for time immemorial, and will be here in the future. We acknowledge Indigenous genocide and the continued oppression of Native peoples, voices, cultures, and spiritualities. And we understand how education has been used by settler institutions and the attempted erasure of Indigenous peoples. We commit to interrogating the histories of and our complicity in colonization, centering Native voices and communities, and dismantling the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism at Phillips Academy and beyond. So join us every other Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time through December for our presentations. For a schedule of dates and presenters, please visit us at peabody.andover.edu or at the Massachusetts Archaeological Society's Facebook page. And if you enjoy our programming, consider expanding your impact by becoming a member of the Massachusetts Archaeological Society. We are able to bring you outstanding programming like this through the support of viewers like you. And today we are excited to welcome Gabriela Oré Menédez. She holds a BA in Humanities, a professional title in Archaeology, and an MA and MD in Studies from the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. And she holds a master's in anthropology from Vanderbilt University, where she is currently a PhD candidate finishing her dissertation. Her research focuses on understanding past landscapes and their transformation and reclamation by local communities in the face of more extensive social changes during the mid-colonial period in Peru. Her experience in digital scholarship and digital humanities offers a unique perspective on the application of digital initiatives for social sciences and spatial analysis research and outreach. Gabriela's stronghold on creative thinking in digital innovations offers an invaluable take on research areas like the humanities, social sciences, spatial analysis, remote sensing, and image interpretation. Her other line of scholarship connects queer theory with anthropological and archaeological scholarship. She is engaged in multiple public-facing outreaches within Vanderbilt and a broader scope, and extensive service as part of the Society for American Archaeology. She is committed to developing an intersectional and global queerization of academics, incorporating binary breaking approaches to research topics and research development. So welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this talk, and I'm very excited to talk to you and to all the public that is joining us today. So let's just start. I will share my screen. Okay. Perfect. Okay, now we are all set. Always takes a little bit of time. Okay, so today's talk, it has a catchy name. I'm sure it's not a clickbait. Queer archaeological practice and the demystification of Indiana Jones. I was so lucky that I found this image. I think it describes very well what the issue to discuss here is, and the issue we're going to discuss. But first, let's go back to why you're here. Is because you pay close attention to the abstract of my talk. What does the general public think about archaeology and archaeologists? Probably the work of people with Indiana Jones-like flair, and probably a cisgender white man, as we just saw in the picture. That image is ingrained in Western culture and has defined the field for decades. And that was the image I had in my head when I decided to pursue archaeology. Now, new faces, new bodies are starting to be noticed and heard in archaeology. However, these new bodies, different bodies, are still considered to be outside the norm, breaking not only with how archaeologists and archaeology look like, but also in how archaeology is practiced, asking different questions, interpreting the data with an alternative scope, and embracing various methodologies. All these approaches that break with the norm, that are like different, all these approaches that break with the norm and show alternative interpretations, moving away from binaries of the past, are subverting archaeological practice, are changing the practice. It's different when you're changing something from the ground up, and it's not the main, you're subverting things. In other words, they are queering archaeology. It's a particular, not only particular phrase, but we're going to see how these two complete things are really related. With this phrase in mind, let's go. So first of all, thank you for the invitation. And if you have any questions, just, well, you put in the chat because I cannot answer right now. Anyway, I also was lucky enough to find this image. We have Harrison Ford in the 1970s and 80s movies, and to the right and to the left we have Hiram Bingham. That happens to be the person that exposed Machu Picchu to the entire world. I don't like to say that he discovered the lost city, but because it was not lost and people knew that were there, especially local people. So we see this similarity between these two characters, and because of the history of cinema, we know that Harrison Ford Indiana Jones was based in different figures in the early 20th century, usually explorers that went to different parts of the world to look for the unknown, to look for whatever was not familiar for them. Sometimes we call them archaeologists, sometimes we call them like people that went into adventures. Whatever is the approach, this is what they had in mind when they designed the character of Indiana Jones. And that has stayed with us for decades now. When I got into archaeology, this is what I had in mind. And right now, when you go to X university and you see what's the profile of an archaeology student, it's the profile before going into archaeology, among other things, says physical resistance and taste for working outdoors, essential when practicing applied archaeology. And this has been changed because it used to say not applied, it used to say like essential when practicing archaeology. And this is storytelling, right? They are putting a way of being into the archaeological practice. And here I want to go a little bit more personal. I study biology, then I changed to archaeology, and I was a little bit older than my peers, and I was queer. And during a lot of time, I was also in the closet. What happened in the archaeological practice, and this is some research about it, it involved, as the previous slide says, it was a lot of like field work, traveling, socializing, living with other people when you have to go to do archaeological field work, living within a community, and all those things that seem like the best thing ever when you compare, in my case, with some other type of profession like accounting. I am not good at numbers, so accounting, it sounds like very, very hard. So, but you have these people that go and stay in the outdoors and are living like for 3 months with no electricity. It sounds very enticing. So I love archaeology, and I went to field work with that same energy, but deep down, first of all, I like field work enough, but I'm not super passionate about going to the fieldwork. And also being queer and being in the closet, I was always not only hiding part of my life, but I was always guarded because I didn't want to look gay or I don't know, but also you don't want to constantly be lying because being queer is one aspect of our lives, but it's also who we are. I have to look, have to dress in a certain way to appease any rumor. I don't know. This was the well, early 2000s. So you go do fieldwork. You live with these people. I had like amazing experiences in fieldwork too. In the image that the two at the bottom, I was living with the community. This lady that is living with me, she will like ask me if I already had breakfast every day, and was make sure I came back from survey in a complete like one piece. But I never told her that I was actually married with a woman, and they asked me directly, and these people that would just ask you, at least in Peru, the Highlands, it's like, are you married? Have you children? Do your husband know that you're here by yourself? So I have to lie because I say like, yes, I'm married because I was out for a long time. And then it's like, oh, no. And that seems just anecdotal, causes a lot of stress. It's a lot. And when we push these traits or these ideas in the mind of the general public and in the mind of people, at the end, we are kind of making invisible those that are different in some type of way. In this case, in my case, it was being queer. And I'm having like this PowerPoint kind of fade out, and it says, and things in Spanish because this is, I'm Peruvian, but it says like alcohol, party, sharing, relationships, pretending, lying, closet, friendship, questioning, community, fraternity. So it's intense, it's a lot of things. So you have to be an archaeologist, and you have to be a student, and you have to do all these things, but also, and you are also far away from your family, and it's not the things like, if you are not in love of the field, like it's cold or hot, anyway. And you have all these like things that you're juggling. So when we don't recognize that we are all different, and we include that in the idea of what an archaeologist look like, then we'll see things differently. There's a publication, the Golden Marshalltown, that is 39 years old. I'm an anthropologist, yeah. So, and it's a great read, the Golden Marshalltown. And I read this for the first time when I was an undergrad, and then I read it again just recently. And it's kind of explain it, but it is like these three archaeologists are all together in an airplane, and then to a conference, let's say SA8, I don't say which one if I don't remember, and they talk, and they talk about the two especially main stereotypes of archaeology, the one that spends all their time in fieldwork, and the one that reads and produces a lot, but it's all about theory. And they were trying to reconcile which one was the best. And it prays a lot in this fictional conversation, versus a lot archaeological practice as fieldwork. There's one mention to her, I don't even remember the context. And in this entire discussion, the final winner, the one that was the ideal archaeologist, is the new boy in town, the one that will inherit the kingdom of archaeology, if you want, the one that will follow the next footsteps, the one that will get the jobs and then will like decide how archaeology looks like. So this was, I don't know when it was written, but it was published in the early 1980s, again, 40 years ago. I wasn't very warm, but still. So all these things that are shown here are not what archaeology looks like in reality. These archaeologists talking in this airplane, on this airplane, we've never thought that someone like me from Peru, queer out, will be doing archaeology and also not doing field work, but I'm doing archaeology. So let's keep going. So you have to understand how archaeological practice or archaeology, let's say, has changed. So the idea of the golden boy, the one that we're going to inherit, and that the discipline, this article coincides like around the same time Indiana Jones was out, right? Like early 80s, late 70s. So this is it, right? It's the best style of James Bond, the male archaeologists, and then later, very slowly, then we have the female version of the archaeologists. It took longer. It's still not at the same level, but now we can talk. An article like the Golden Marshalltown, and to give you context for the non-archaeologists, Marshalltown is the most known brand for travels. Then not in the future, but for the future, for that article, we have the archaeologists and the female archaeologists now like coming and showing a little bit. But again, that's not enough. That does not represent all of us. Now archaeology looks way different. Archaeology has different venues of research that are not that focused on doing fieldwork per se. They do analysis, they do collaborations, they work with the computers, they work in museums, they were doing public outreach, they were with doing archaeometry, doing remote sensing, all these different things, and all those specialists are also archaeologists. Some of them go very little to the field, some of them don't go to the field, work with samples. There's so many different ways of practicing archaeology, but we still have in the head that archaeology is just big, and it's not that. So all these things now, all of these ways of doing archaeology and all of these different people doing archaeology, I have to go here to Andrew Illustrated, that they have this catalog of anthropology and of anthropologists doing a different type of research or different type of activities with different body types, different gender expression, different ethnicity. So you should check it out. The link it's there. AndrewIllustrated.com. Great tool showing what anthropology is, showing what archaeology is. Anyway, so we have different people doing archaeology. That is not what archaeology was in our mind, right? In our mind, archaeology was this, but what we're seeing here is it's different. It's strange, a little bit odd from a conventional viewpoint, right? From the conventional archaeology, this is like a little bit odd, unusually different for sure. For sure, the archaeology and archaeological practice is still mostly white, and I don't remember, but the power positions are held by people identified as male. Singular. All these adjectives are a little bit like the definition of queer. Queer as the word reclaimed now, because the term queer has a history of becoming what we see on the screen, then it was a slur, then it was reappropriated by the queer community. So all these different types of archaeology could be considered queer. But queer and queer theory, it's very hard to define. Queer theorists and people that study queer theory they say that if you don't actually define queer theory, it's at its purpose. You should not do that. It's hard. Because queer, as we see in this description, is that thing that is different, that is strange, that it's outside the norm, that it's non-conventional. So having to define that becomes audit itself. There are multiple queer theories rather than one queer theory. Several of these actually contradict each other. The word queer also have many different meanings. Even back when queer theory began, people were already asking where it was, or like it was over. It was just a thing that happened, and it's been like for 40 years already. Queer theory has been criticized for being inaccessible and full of difficult words. Many queer theories refuse to say what queer theory is, arguing that it resists definition and it's impossible to capture. It is a discipline that refuses to be disciplined. But nevertheless, we're going to use that framework to explain what is necessary to queer the archaeological practice. And I cannot dedicate the entire talk to explain what queer theory is. First of all, I couldn't, it's like too complicated, but we're going to try a little. At least I will tell you what it challenged and what those principal assumptions kind of are. For example, queer theory speaks to erase fixed and essential identity. You don't only have an identity, you have multiple identities. We're refusing this idea. Fixed sexual and gender identities. Also, queer theory does not think that you're born female and then this is how you look, this is how you fall in love, this is how you act, this is how society sees you. No, we assume this is fluid thing. And also the idea that from normal against abnormal, that's a binary in itself. Queer theory doesn't think that something is normal and it's like cheering for the abnormal. Queer theory opposes the idea of having binaries. With that in mind, we can say, for example, for the case of sexual identity, gender identity, you have a fixed sex, male or female. Then the world, society builds a stable gender, either masculine or feminine. And then starting from there, that determines your desires. Opposite sex and being really progress, same sex. But we need to go really outside the matrix. We should change this way of thinking, and we should start thinking about, it's not that you have a fixed sex, it's you have a body, because also you don't have a fixed sex, you can be intersexual, you have a body. You don't have a stable gender, you may perform an identity, because having and this is a completely different talk, but if you identify a female or male, the way you perform that to the outside will, even in that case, not be the same in one place or the other. So you perform an identity. And then you have desires, opposite sex, same sex, both, or none. So we need to kind of break inside the matrix. That's kind of the truth. And all those three things are not a straight line. Those are just interconnected and not connected in a way. Those things just happen. That's the idea of queer theory, very broadly. Now, still inside the matrix, we remember what queer theory challenges. But give me a second. Okay. This is not what queer challenges, as we already saw. All these things are applied now to archaeology. And you say like, okay, How? And the first thing that we all are thinking is it opens about sexuality in the past. Queer theory tends to study sexuality in the past, gender in the past, and there's some archaeological work about that, and that's amazing because why are we assuming that our own values, our own family values and our own sexualities and our own genders were the same in the past and in different cultures? So queer archaeology does that. But also it criticizes research that does not understand how problematic it is to see past society with lenses of Euro-American, Judeo-Christian, Western binaries approaches. And that goes to the first point. I mean, why would we assume that what we consider like a nuclear family is happening the same in other time and space? Also, it challenged the idea about static identities. The Queen of England was always the Queen of England, and that's not changed. But before she was a princess, and now queer archaeology says like that's not necessarily the progress. You need to be open to different and changing identities in the life of an individual. And it brings to the front the concept, of course, of gender identities. We all have seen in the news last year, an archaeological research expressed that women used to hunt, and that's different. What we used to think that women didn't hunt, that's a gender action, right? And in gender identities, there was the warrior women of Scandinavia. So people found warriors assume male, and when they do DNA, the DNA said that they had female identified genetics. So it, of course, challenges the idea of opposition to normative approach. Because thinking in a normative way in archaeology, it's not necessarily a good practice, because we're not studying what we know. We're studying something we don't know anything about. Like some things in the past, we don't have written text, etc. And we need to rethink especially those binaries. I'm not only talking about male and female. I'm talking about gay and straight. I'm talking about commoners and elite. I'm talking about religious versus secular, private versus public. We need to be open to the idea that the answer of what we're interpreting, or the interpretation we're having from our archaeological data, it's for sure different. It's not within those binaries always. Chelsea Blackmore, she's an archaeologist whom I admire a lot. She has this amazing article where she applies queer theory to study the Mayas in Belize. And she says that she uses queer theory to study identity and status, reframes archaeological discussion of identity as complex, situational, and contextual, challenges the normalization of commoner. We're not talking about the gender identity in this case, we're talking about the identity of a commoner. She mentioned that the construction of commoner are part of a dichotomized binary, one structure in opposition to the identities and practices of the elite, creates unspoken hierarchies. If we go and see the archaeological research with the idea of, okay, I need to excavate the house of the governor that I assume is going to be sumptuous, and then I need to excavate the house of a commoner. I'm already applying binaries that might not reflect the actual reality. She also has this quote that I think is very telling. Feminists and post-colonial critics have recognized that science itself is contextual, and as such necessitates a critical response from those who exist on the margins of society. In a similar manner, querying the past forces us to interrogate our own assumptions, what I was just saying, antiquated identities. Without such critical examinations, archaeology remains an antiquarian pursuit rather than an emancipatory practice, one that situates our epistemology and focuses our discussion to an analysis of difference. I think that's really, really interesting because it's saying what archaeology should be doing if archaeology wants to really try to understand a broader picture of the past. Then, still within the matrix. Remember that queer theory challenge fixed and essential identities, sex and gender, and normal versus abnormal. We need to tweak this a little bit because what we want to do is we want to queer knowledge, identities, and institutions. Not only apply that straightforward to our research, but we want to broaden that up to be open to understand things better in general. I mean, Judith Butler and Michel Foucault are considered the grandparents and the godparents better of queer theory, but what we want now is kind of reframe not only queer theory, but queer archaeology. And in that sense, we need to change a little things, fix and essential identities in the past. Not only sex and gender, but also binaries in archaeological interpretation, challenges binaries in archaeological interpretation. And it challenged not only normal versus abnormal, but it challenged our own Western Christian colonial patriarchal heteronormative white supremacist society. And what we want to get from this is queer knowledge, identities, and institutions. It doesn't mean that we want to celebrate Pride every day in all the institution. It's not about that. It's about acknowledging that we have these binaries, acknowledging that our own biases, histories, and culture frames how people incorporate other ideas, other point of views, other bodies, and other persons or individuals. And of course, this doesn't have to do with necessarily with Western academy, but it opens to queer indigenous studies. It opens to listen other voices from other parts of the world, not only Western and Northern. Then, if we reread our abstract, what does the general public think about archaeology and archaeologists? Probably the work of people with an Indiana Jones-like flair and probably cisgender white men. That image is engraved in Western cultures and has defined the field for decades. Now, new faces and bodies, what I was telling you, are starting to be noticed and here in archaeology. However, these new bodies, different bodies, are still considered outside the norm. So, asking different questions, interpreting data with an alternative scope and embracing various methodologies. We're moving away from binary explanations and we're queering archaeology, opening the discipline to alternative ways of doing archaeology and being an archaeologist. We have these two individuals and how we open archaeology, we need to understand that archaeological practice itself is not only for body able, cisgender, straight, white individuals. It's also and should be open to incorporate everybody. And when I said everybody, I mean queer persons. We need to pay special attention. I'm sorry for that. Individuals with disabilities, people of color, women of color, local archaeologists, because we tend to go outside and study the other. We tend to go to different latitudes. That is our home. I am from Peru. I work in Peru, but from Lima. I work in Guadalquivir, the Highland Andes, with communities, and I'm an outsider. We need to take into account the host communities because we're working on their history, in their space. And we need to account neurodiverse individuals because thinking outside the box, it's always good. It's always a good idea to incorporate different types of thinking, different way of seeing a problem. But we need to do this in an active manner. Not only because we should, because everyone should be doing archaeology, because it's good archaeological practice, because it helps to bring different point of view to what we're seeing on the archaeological record, because it helps us to see different solutions to questions, because it forces us to ask different questions. My questions about my research questions might not be the same that someone with my exact same training that is not from Peru, for example. We might have different interests, we have different stories, and that influence what we are thinking and what we want to know about the past. And what I know about the past is not the same of what someone from my host community knows. So I need to talk to them. I need to incorporate all these actors into the archaeological practice. And that is nowadays way more. Nowadays, every job post have this, like people have to work with the community, and I think it's great, but that was not the norm very recent ago. So this is good. This is what it means we're archaeologists, but not only on what type of individuals do archaeology, but also the types of archaeology that that we do, and that has to do with not only doing field work, like the classic image of somewhere away from urban places, far away, and having to camp and all these things that we know because of the Diggin In. But there's a lot of work in archaeology that it has to be done in labs, in computers. Different type of archaeologists are going to do different type of work. And we need to incorporate that idea into what archaeology is. Otherwise, I will still be asking every time I tell somebody that I'm an archaeologist about one specific thing, what's the other thing that you have found? And do you go to way far away to do excavation? It's like, no, I work in computer. I work with computers. I work with satellites. Because I think doing fieldwork is important, and I can collaborate with people. And I will go and take that information and try to analyze it in community with the input of the community. So this is the new way of doing archaeology, because it gives us more data, it gives us more information. So again, it's good practice. At the end of the day, it's incorporating everyone into what we do. Again, actively include sexual and gender diversity. And I say here actively because it's not only like everyone is welcome. We need to acknowledge people. In my case, I will ask, hey, my pronouns are she, hers. What are you like? We need to actively educate people. We need to educate people to actively include sexual and gender diversities. We need to be open to the preconceived notions that all archaeologists do exactly the same. We need to incorporate multivocal approach, all the voices that need to be speaking about archaeological research, the host communities, indigenous communities, the descendant communities, colleagues from where we are going, students. We need to incorporate all these voices and actively open the practice for disabled archaeologists, visible and invisible disabilities. And again, when I say active, is we need to not only wait passively to somebody that, hey, I cannot, I need some resources to do this A or B task. We need to be open to the idea, and we need to be always mindful that we work with people with disabilities, many of them hiding disabilities, but you already know that because you saw Laura's presentation and the other episode. So this is what archaeology should look like. This is what archaeologists look like in general. Different nationalities, different ethnicities, different bodies, different minds, different genders, and all with the goal of having different perspectives to analyze and to do research. Green archaeological practice should be at the top of our priority, right where what our research question is, how are we going to get that, what are we doing? Because we're not there yet where it's a common thing. So we need to actively, again, embrace this idea of multivocality. We need to actively embrace colleagues that work in different manner with different technologies. This is what queer and archaeological practice means. And yes, it's breaking. It's breaking. I'm sorry, with the idea of the Indiana Jones that we said at the beginning. It will be more dramatic if already. Just want to have that in mind. We need to break out of the matrix and just go back to changing this idea. This is not what archaeologists look like. This is what archaeology looks like now. It's like everybody. You guys have any questions?
Yeah, if you guys have questions, you can put it in the chat or in the Q&A. I will say I did like all the stuff on disabilities. It very much was harkening back to, like you said, Laura's discussion a few episodes ago about trying to change what a normal archaeologist looks like, right? Okay, so a few questions we already have is, are there research areas that you find are more welcoming to queer theory, ones that are more resistant? And do you think that's because of the type of practitioners in the field, or do you think it's because the subject matter is easier or harder for people to sort of wrap their minds around changing how they're viewing it to use a lens of queer theory? I know that was a lot, so.
No, it's fine. That's a very complicated question, because queer theory in general has these, it's very hard to just explain, but before that, it has all these baggage of being related exclusively to queer individuals. And if you hear queer archaeology, as I did the first time, it's like, oh, we're going to excavate gay people. And that's not it. Yeah, there's a resistance in terms of queer theory, because I have never read in my classes anything about queer theory as I was an undergrad, or even during my master's. It was kind of because of personal interest. I kind of moved. I was lucky enough to have mentors that helped me to do that. So I went into queer theory and queer archaeology. I wouldn't say that there's any part of archaeology that is more resistant. It has to do with a generational thing. Sometimes, not always. But once we pass the first resistance, I think it's a very, yeah. But that's why another thing to do is kind of change the curricula so students can read about things. 20 years ago, it was a big thing, gender archaeology. But then feminist archaeology kind of went into the discussion, and people, when once somebody told me when I was very young, it's like, no, that's feminist archaeology, gender archaeology, those things are not kind of very serious subjects to, or themes to explore if you want to take it serious as a scholar. So obviously now that wouldn't happen, and that but that was the message 10, 15 years ago. So it's not like people that study processual, that have this processual approach are opposed, or like, and these are the ones that are like, no. It's just like, I think it's more an individual thing. You have to do with who is teaching. Yeah. And I guess now maybe who is teaching is what is fast. Yep. And yeah, so.
Yeah, no, and it definitely is getting worked into it more. And I'm sorry if you're on the line and I messed it up, but I think it was in Indiana, or maybe in Pennsylvania, there was a university that shared the post about the flyer for your talk, and apparently they had just discussed it in one of their like seminar classes. So, you know, because they're like, oh, our kids just learned it, you know, our students just learned about this, you know, and all that. And it was like, oh, because yeah, when I was in grad school, it wasn't something we covered, you know, in 2004 or 2005, right?
Yeah, I know exactly.
Yeah, it's like you said, the feminist stuff was like groundbreaking, right? Like, and it was like, oh, can I?
And you would have radical.
Yeah, right.
Archaeology, male archaeologists hate it. Like, no, and now it's not when we know one, now we understand. So
yeah. Another question, sort of very similar, I think, is what do you think the biggest challenge that queer theory faces as it works to become more broadly incorporated into the field?
I think the first challenge will be us.
Mm.
When I say us, it's like people that actually talk about queer theory for two things. First of all, we need to be very careful, and this is something I talked in a different presentation, but our own agenda needs to be put not necessarily on hold, but needs to be discussed. Because we can try to interpret the archaeological data. No, we interpret archaeological data with our own baggage, and that baggage is different for everybody. And I could push inadvertently for one interpretation that is very, very queer in the LGBTQI plus sense. And maybe it's not in the sense of, for example, if I found a burial of somebody that has genetical female traits and their gender expression is assumed to be masculine, as I mentioned this case for warrior, for example. I can write a paper about it, and I can share all the data and all the information, but then I can say at the end, and this shows how the X culture was accepting and was pushing boundaries, when in reality it could be just a thing, and nobody in that period of time in that particular culture would have thought about it twice. So that's, I'm not saying that we are altering the data, but how we not only interpret, but how we give weight to things, it's very, very delicate. And that's why we need to talk with community members and descendant communities in general. I think that's the first challenge, in the same sense, but opposite, because I go to the field and I was giving a class the other day, and I was mentioning this issue, for example, of the women the hunter, and this bureau of women in the Andes that they have like hunting capabilities. And I didn't say women the hunter when I referred to this article or to this research. I said this individual, female individuals that were assumed to be doing hunting activities. I just went into a look because my first my first inner reaction, cultural, socially formed in this Peruvian, in this case, will tell me is man the hunter, women will go and do not hunting. So it kind of took a double take for me to say just women the hunter. Now I can say, but so I think that's another thing that we need to be careful, because our own bias, we still take our bias, and we will keep doing it because we cannot just let the brain and put an empty one with no preconceived anything to just do archaeology, right? So I think those are the very main challenges. And if you want a third one, I will say like it depends who is teaching, and in our time that was not a thing, and we are very young.
We have another question. How can civilian archaeologists who employ queer theory actually get those in positions of established scholastic power to listen to, much less hear the theories? And what can we do here on the sort of outside, as it were, to help change these dichotomous paradigms?
Um, that's a very good question. And I want to say this is a very good question is because I never thought about it before. This sounds cocky. It was not present. It was not a thing that I was thinking because it was not in the realm of the things I do. And I think it's very important what you said. Obviously, any archaeologist comes with a theory. We follow the scientific method, and that's fine. But I think we decide what theory to apply to because we think it's the best, and there's no bad theory in general. But the public, the general public, civilian archaeologists, you should just ask questions. I was in a presentation once and somebody said, like, we found this domestic structure, so we can assume nuclear family. I was like, could you assume nuclear family? Have you found the individuals buried? Like, you cannot. And the best thing is to ask questions, because what we are discussing here, what I might write in my dissertation, what I might present in a different thing, in order for that to get to a museum and then to the general public and then to textbooks, yes, that's a lot. I get excited, but if when you go to a museum, you go to a presentation, you ask that question, not to kind of say like, you don't know this, but to say like, really, how do you know? Sometimes we know and just omit the answer, and sometimes it's very important to mention and you not just only assume that individuals that were buried with knitting materials or objects were women, and individuals buried with armors were male. Those kind of things. So asking questions when there's no the hard evidence, and when it's called, right? But because the issue here, and that happened once with a professor of mine. He told me, then we cannot say anything if we don't have like a frame of reference. We don't have these binaries, as we were saying, like outside, inside, community, and governors. So yes, it's not that we cannot just say anything because everything goes. It's just having, at least in the back of your mind, the idea that you should be open to other interpretations that are outside the box.
I would say this makes me think of a lesson I do with some of my students. They're high school students, and they have to look through trash and they have to tell me like a biography of the person, right? But they use the binaries, like you say, but and it's always my trash, right? So it's like they're like, this person has kids and all this stuff, and it's like, I don't have children, so they're like, wait, what? And it's like, yeah, I'm a very involved aunt, right? And so it's kind of like doing that, like, how can you say it like without saying that person's a mother, right? Or a parent? It's like, they're like, oh, like that person has a close relationship with some child or something, right? Like, and so we try and break that down for them.
Yeah, and there's things that we are not going to know within the archaeological record, right?
We need a time machine to know some of this stuff.
But where's all the fun?
I know, right?
But I know I don't say anything. We have this mural in Egypt of these two individuals that thought to be, first of all, in the 60s, brothers, because they're like looking at each other and very close. And there's like, in the 70s was like, no, they're twins. I mean, in the 2000s, when we have the first and only issue of archaeology dedicated to queer archaeology, somebody said like, they're too close to be brothers and to be twins. They're probably a couple. And that's another possible explanation. The thing is, like, we don't know, or we don't have any more elements to say, like, oh, maybe they were just close friends. We don't know, but why should we assume one or the other from the get-go, right?
So the last question we have, are there any resources or books that you would recommend for those who want to learn more about queer theory?
Yeah, there's an amazing book that where actually I took the one of the images that it's just let me give you the reference right now. It's called Queer Graphic History, and it's literally a graphic novel from a graphic book. Let me put that in the
Chat.
Oh yeah. That's taken to everyone. Perfect. I think it's very clear explanation of the entire of what queer theory is, like, in a broad sense, and it's really easy to read because it has humans.
Okay.
Cartoons, basically. It's very entertaining too. So I will say that. Then there's the queerarchaeology.com webpage that we created with a group of queer archaeologists that belong to the Society for American Archaeology. There's resources there. There's more things to read, more related to archaeology. There's blogs of archaeologists talking about it. So that's a good resource that we put together some years ago with Nathan Canberra and Chelsea Blackmore. But yeah, so those are the resources where you should begin to explore.
Okay.
But the book is great. I really like it.
We'll try and share those some of that stuff in an email with people who had signed up for today. With that was our last question. So I want to thank our viewers for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you at our next lecture, which will be on Wednesday, December 1st. And we will be joined by Dr. Kimberly Casper, who will be speaking about the archaeology of food inequality. And again, we rely on the support of viewers like you, so consider supporting our outright reach by becoming a member of the Massachusetts Archaeological Society. So thank you, Gabe. Again, basically I book speakers on topics I really want to know more about. So I was very excited when you agreed to do this. So thank you. And thank you, everyone. So
thank you, everyone. Bye.